Hello, my name is Edward Jackson. Welcome to the Next 313 program with the Detroit Outgrowth Corporation. You'll have a live audience tonight, so if you hear some clatter in the background, it's some of our participants who are here as well to ask some questions towards the tail end of the program. We're joined tonight with Mr. Ed Carrington, the mayor of Flux City. You want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Flux City, how you came about with the concept and what that means to you?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a scatterbrain, so you're going to see me looking at my notes all throughout this conversation. So I just wanted to throw that disclaimer at you. But Eddie Carrington, I call myself the mayor of Flux City. It's just a different way to say founder or owner. I always like to figure out a way to stand out in one format or another. But I am a real estate developer, quote unquote, as well as I am a person that is a fan of sharing media about real estate and the happenings of what's going on here in the city of Detroit. I mean, this city is on a rise, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. But the word flux means a state of constant change. And so, you know, the word flux in some scenarios is looked at as a negative connotation. But, you know, when we're talking about constant change, I kind of think about the city of Detroit when it comes to the definition of flux. And I feel that it's more of a positive meaning than it is negative. And I just see specifically the city of Detroit just continuously evolving. It's changing right in front of our very eyes. And, you know, the crazy part about this, the evolution of the city, is how it really seems like it's silent, slow, and it's a scenario where 10 years from now, 5 years from now, you're going to blink and you're going to say, wait a minute, where'd that come from, right? How in the world did you know, Michigan Central get to this point when, in fact, they've been slowly going through the process of redeveloping that site for years, right? But now, all of a sudden, I'm just using Michigan Central as an example. You have this big, beautiful development that is monumental for the city and world class. I'm not talking about for the states. I'm talking about, you know, for you know, world class. People across the world is talking about what Ford did with Michigan Central, what Dan Gilbert is doing downtown, what us as developers are doing within the neighborhoods. And so, you know, I just really appreciate, you know, the evolution of the city, and once again, just wanted to incorporate that, you know, that in the overall branding of the organization that I manage. And so that's where that definition or word came from.
So one of the pictures we have behind here is it's a recent ribbon cutting for one of your tenants, Little Liberia, at the Ribbon on East Warren. It's easy to kind of fast forward and think about, okay, this guy built an apartment building with residential and commercial at the bottom. But how did you get into construction, real estate development? Was this something you always wanted to do as a child, or is it something that you kind of grew into gradually?
So I started actually when I graduated from Eastern Michigan. Go Eagles! Can you Eagles in? Let's go! Let's go! And so graduated Eastern Michigan University and got into banking. I had a business administration degree, so I got into banking. And my first bank was on 8 Mile and Lindsay, and then my second bank was Grand River and Finkel. But there were a lot of my clients that were blue collar individuals, you know, worked at the big three, Ford, GM, Chrysler at that time. And a lot of individuals, a lot of my clients had their focus when it comes to retirement on real estate, not their pension, not Social Security. They were looking at real estate as their primary, you know, retirement plan. And so I had a few customers that had 20, 30 different properties that were Section 8 properties. They were getting their money pretty consistently, and they were doing pretty well, actually making more money on the real estate side than their 9 to 5. But I also learned from them that their 9 to 5 was their best business partner when it comes to their entrepreneurial realm, because the 9 to 5 helped them have the W-2s in place, have, you know, insurance in place, and in turn helped them be able to purchase their real estate in a format that was semi-conventional, and ultimately got them to a point where they were able to, in some scenarios, have 20, 30 properties under their umbrella. But that motivated me, right? I'm talking to these individuals and I'm like, wow, you know, this gentleman can do it, this young lady can do it, maybe I can too. And so bought my first property with the direction of one of my clients, and it was a disaster. Bought it, you know, did a lot of the construction myself, trying my best at saving money, learning the process in one format or another, and I ultimately broke even. But after 6-7 months, ended up flipping this property, breaking even. That was enough for me to say, okay, what I was able to learn throughout that process, instead of me saying, okay, because over 90% of the individuals who buy investment properties, once they buy their first property, they have a similar experience as I had, and they don't buy anymore, right? And so, but I got the bug because I saw the opportunity, and I was able to also carry over, or my goal was to carry over what I learned from those mistakes from that first property over into future properties, and that's exactly what I did. And so, over the years, I kept buying properties. In most scenarios, I'd buy them, fix them, and flip them. In some scenarios, I'd buy them and lease them out. Some wins, some losses. The land bank is probably the go-to for me when I was in the single-family realm. But one particular loss I had with the land bank was buying a property for $5,000, putting about, I'd say $9,000, $9,000 to $10,000 into it, and eventually signing it back over to the land bank because, not because I ran out of money, not because of the time frame. Even though they give you a small window of time, they are willing to work with you if you're familiar with real estate, and more specifically the land bank. As long as you're working on the properties that you're buying from the land bank, they're willing to work with you. But in this particular scenario, for whatever reason, somebody in the neighborhood targeted this site, busted all of my new windows, stole my kitchen cabinets off the walls, kicked in my back door, and at one point I said, look, this is a site that's causing me so many headaches and so many problems. I imagine myself potentially having to defend myself, and because I was there a lot, and if I were to have come across somebody, doing certain things, and so I decided in that particular scenario to sign it back over to the land bank and move on, take my L, call it a day, right?
So when you talk about disaster, I've always been told that pain can be a great teacher. The pain of others can be even a better teacher, right? If you can learn from other people's mistakes.
Absolutely.
So when you look back at that challenge that you faced in that first property where you barely just broke even and it was called a disaster, when you look back on it now, do you think you would have learned as much if you had just gone ahead and hired a contractor the first time around? Or do you think that, now you're obviously working with construction firms to get the projects done, but do you think that you putting in that sweat equity in the first property, learning some hard lessons, learning some expensive lessons, that informed your decision when you started hiring somebody to do that kind of, that muscle work?
Absolutely. However, even with those opportunities of learning from that first property, you're still consistently learning and still consistently running into challenges. So back to your point of hiring somebody to do it. I've had contractors run off on me after, putting a couple grand in their pocket and never seeing them again, right? I've had, contractors that I had a good relationship with that they did a really amazing job on the previous property, and I in turn find myself saying, hey, look, I'll just pay you the full, amount that I owe you now, because, we're building a relationship. Next thing you know, once again, they never answer their call after I give them the payment. So, it's just in real estate, especially in the city of Detroit, with the lack of skilled trades, licensed skilled trades, you just consistently are running into the challenges when it comes to single family properties. And your goal is to obviously try to save as much money on the redevelopment or the rehab of it, because you can really, you know, get all your profit at the point of buying the site, right? You gotta, you know, you're getting a good deal. Your good deal comes at the very beginning of the acquisition of the site. And so, you know, along with that, making sure your numbers are in line, making sure you have the right GC you're working with, but you know, all of that to just say, you know, you're still going to run into opportunities to learn and to get humble and to find yourself frustrated. But you just kept pressing, you know, keep pressing forward, especially in real estate. You know, no one project is going to be the exact same. There's going to be some foundation issues on this site that you didn't realize were, you know, run into, or you know, the shingles that you thought were good, and the person that you know assumed installed did the work, did a good job. Turns out that they didn't. But you know, let's say you didn't walk the site in the rain, so now you're over there and it's raining, and you're like, what the hell's going on? You know, all types of just random things that you just kind of learn throughout the overall process of getting to a point where you have, you know, a good system in place when you're redeveloping or rehabbing properties.
So a common term that you would hear in that case is contingency,
Yeah.
right? Planning for the unknown. You want to kind of talk about that contingency, and maybe even as you shifted from single family into multifamily, that's obviously like kind of going from like almost like high school to college, or college to NFL possibly for you. You want to kind of talk about that shift and how you had to learn patience, or you know, learning resilience within a project, and being willing to say, hey, I have to go into this knowing that mistakes will be made, or assumptions will be false, or things, the information that we had in front of us wasn't complete.
You know, when it comes to like smaller properties, and when I first got into the real estate game, and actually for the most part, most of my single family properties, you'd have an assumption that, you know, something, you're not going to be able to budget for everything. You're not going to be able to, you know, forecast all of the issues that you come across. But, you know, contingency typically is around 10% of the overall total budget of this rehab that you're doing. So, you know, you may have $5,000, $10,000 for a line item for contingency, but I want to kind of jump or shift gears a little bit, because I ended up going from single family fix and flips to a mixed-use development, new construction. And so I don't have any development experience outside of the residential side, but I was able to convince the community over in East English Village and Invest Detroit to give me an opportunity to redevelop an old bank into 18 apartments with 2 retail bays at the bottom. But going from, you know, $5,000 to $10,000 assumptions when it comes to contingency, and you know, I'm also going to be honest, like that wasn't all cash, right? A majority of that was credit card, you know, because when it comes to flipping multiple homes, you don't have a lot of dry powder. You don't have, you know, at least me specifically, you know, my budget was pretty thin for the houses that I was doing, to a point where, you know, back to the point, I didn't have cash. Anyway,
Yeah.
so going from, you know, this $1,000 house I bought from the land bank to an $8 million redevelopment, that contingency on that property was $500,000. Actually, a little over $500,000. So we're talking the contingency alone was more than any of the properties that I've done on the single family. You know, the roof on that property was over $100,000, right? So not too many of the properties that I bought rehab came with $100 budget, right? And so like it was just a different game when it comes to the commercial side versus the residential side.
And so, you know, when you look at yourself today as a, you know, completing this project, I'm sure you have some others in the pipeline now. When you first started out, obviously you were just getting that first house done, that 2-3 bedroom house was a big jump for you. You look at yourself today, doing 18 units, and also, you know, doing ribbon cuttings with the mayor as well, Madam Mayor. You know, what encouragement would you have for Next 313 participants who may not come from a mom or a dad or auntie who does real estate? They don't know anything about this, but they do see that property they've been walking past, you know, for their whole childhood, that's still vacant now, and they're like, I'm gonna do something with that. what encouragement would you have for them? Maybe I have some questions for you in a second too, but what encouragement would you have for them? And maybe shout out a few resources locally, programs they should enroll into, classes they should take, things that you're like, hey, I wish this was around when I was coming up.
Yeah. So building community value has better buildings, better blocks. And so that's a cohort that Chase Camp Trail runs. And this cohort teaches you everything you need to know about real estate development when it comes to the single family or multi-unit strategy that you may be considering up to maybe eight units or less. But at the end of the day, if you identify a property in your neighborhood and you're passionate about potentially trying to redevelop or rehab it, shoot your shot, take a chance and don't sit on the sideline and try to figure out ways. And, if you see it, you start doing your research and you figure out who owns that site. If you find out that the city owns it, you zap emails off and you say, hey, look, I'm interested in this property. How much is it going to cost? If you don't have the money that they're asking for yet, still put your bid in and figure it out in real time. I know that's not that's not good business advice, but trust and believe if you're really passionate about, getting into the real estate game and we're talking about a property that like your example is in your neighborhood and your community, you'd be shocked at how much support you're going to have from these different programs and entities and organizations that may be able to help you get that property, from idealization to completion. So, it's kind of a high level recommendation, but, you can go to, I use LandGrid, and LandGrid allows for you to type in an address and you're able to really understand who owns that site. You can get potentially the zoning information of that particular site. And all of that really helps you, strategize. Let's say if this site that you're interested in has a few land bank parcels next to it, maybe you're able to buy this property and also acquire the land bank parcels next door to this site if it's contiguous. And I think the land bank parcels are at $200 per parcel now. So I do know of individuals who bought property and or own property next to land bank parcels, and they eventually acquired 5, 6, 7 contiguous lots next to their house, which could be used for future development or other concepts for that homeowner. So.
And I just can't stress enough the importance of just having a positive mindset.
Yes.
Understanding that tough times will come, and that's why we want to lean into your resources. Understand what's out there to kind of help you kind of learn from the mistakes of others, learn from the pain of others, and also not necessarily do it the hard way all the time. But understanding that that no one is just stamped with hey, you're supposed to be a developer. It's something that you can make that choice to do these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of people in here may not necessarily be in real estate. So I had an opportunity to have a conversation with a few folks. And how many entrepreneurs are in the room? So a majority of them, right? A majority of you have your own business, maybe a nonprofit. One of the biggest mistakes I see us as entrepreneurs do is not brag about yourself. And so I'll use LinkedIn for an example. I asked, a number of folks, some of the folks I didn't get a chance to ask about your LinkedIn, but for whatever reason, we don't go online and we don't talk about all of the amazing things that we're doing when it comes to our business. And in some scenarios, it may be because we have a 9-to-5, right? Because you may be concerned that your coworkers may, kind of see what you got going on, or maybe your business is not officially, you haven't notified your organization about your side hustle, right? And I was actually that person as well. At one point, I was in IT. Prior to that, I was in banking and all of that good stuff. But once I actually started to put out in the universe what I was working on and not care about if somebody who comes across this content that I'm sharing is going to say I post too much or he's bragging. Like, you'd be surprised at how many doors just opened when it came to me just highlighting the things that I was doing. right? And me living my truth publicly, right? Basically, me telling you to increase the amount of correspondence you have with your network when it comes to, once again, bragging about your business, bragging about your accomplishments. And there's just so much content that you can create throughout your daily, monthly, weekly. You need to get out your own head, get out your own way, and make sure you let your network know how amazing of a person you are, how amazing of a business you have. Because back to, we're talking business, but we're also, one thing I want to also highlight is your personal brand is separate from your business, but they're also one and the same in a way, right? Because in 2026, when we're talking about small business, people aren't just buying your product, they're buying and they're trusting you and they're believing in you and they're supporting you. And so you have to make sure you do your due diligence from your content creation side, and you start sharing more, right? You put on LinkedIn your business. If you got a LinkedIn page and your business isn't anywhere, like you're doing this wrong. And I'm using LinkedIn because I feel like LinkedIn is so underutilized by us that you need to really consider putting a little more energy and effort into your professional network. Your Instagram is cool, don't get me wrong, but most of your Instagram following are, school, family, friends, and of course they're going to support you in one format or another, but you'd be shocked at the amount of support you get, once again, when you start living your truth on platforms like LinkedIn. So that's a random thing I just wanted to throw at you.
We'll take a few minutes for questions. Quick fact, LinkedIn is the social media platform that above 50% professionals say they'll never delete. Do they use it all the time? No. But people get off of other social media platforms all the time and they even delete their accounts. People don't really delete their LinkedIn.
I will say one caveat is a lot of people use LinkedIn, but they don't post on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
There's so many people that I connect with and I'm connected with, and they're like, yeah, I saw you post on, about, I had Kamala Harris come to my site a couple of months ago. So I saw you, so okay, let's, I checked your page out. You haven't posted since 2024.
Yeah.
But people are on LinkedIn and they're consuming. So a majority of people are consuming on LinkedIn, whereas you have an opportunity where if you create the content that others consume, you'd be surprised as, you're highlighted more so. And if and when you submit for a grant or, you're going for a contract, you'd be surprised at who's watching your moves. And that in turn could indirectly help you get more business in one format or another.
We'll take some questions. Ask your question. I'm going to repeat the question because the mic's, here on my shirt. So, and then after this, we'll have a few words from our host as well, because I definitely want you to learn about her. Putting you on the spot, Dr. Deanna Stewart of this beautiful Equity Line space. This is gut rehab. So again, I don't think you came from a construction background yourself and you jumped into it. If we had a third mic, we'd throw you up here too. But another day. So any questions? Nothing's off limits. And if it is, we'll say no comment.
How many people are using AI in your daily routine? It's a superpower.
Yeah.
It is a superpower. So, I know we hear the word AI a lot, and that can encompass a number of things, but it took me weeks, if not months, to put together proposals, whereas with AI, half an hour. It's crazy what you can do with the right prompts. And so...
And if you just remember too, AI, it builds on what you already know. So what do you feed the machine as well? I did want to bring up the point you made about some of the dollar figures you threw out in terms of these the single families that you were doing, and $5,000, $9,000. I think sometimes people think, oh, that's going to be a $100,000 project every time, and maybe it is depending on the property that you're buying. But to kind of speak too about some of the capital, right, and what things these individuals should be doing now. They know, hey, maybe in 5 years, 10 years, I do want to, instead of leasing my store, I want to own the store and me leasing out another unit to somebody else to operate their small business out of, or I would love to have apartments above me, maybe live in one of the apartments myself and then run the business downstairs and lease it out to other folks. What are some of the things we can start doing from a capital standpoint, personal finance, or also just thinking about the business financial statements so that we can qualify for funding to, whether it's our personal equity, but also, debt, grants, things like that to fund these projects?
I will say that in my scenario, I used equity from a primary home at the time of me, initially getting into real estate to in turn assist with the build out of and the purchase of, certain properties. But I also will say that, having a 9-to-5, having a W-2, in a number of scenarios, I would, buy a property. I didn't have the full asking price of the property, but of course I'd get a mortgage on it. And so, taking the home equity or a refinance of our primary property and using it as a, portion of it as a down payment for another property or an investment property, that's kind of how I did in one strategy, whereas other strategies I'd buy, a land bank property for $1,000, $2,000 cash, and those scenarios, I kind of put myself in a little bit more of a riskier scenario because it's like I'm buying it, yeah, it's going to need $30,000. I think I'm at about 25 right now that I can kind of manage with this site. And we'll see what happens with the other. Let's see if I can get the numbers, to work and get us to the point where we can make it happen. So I don't know if I'm answering your question as professional as you're looking for. At the end of the day, real estate is a bit of a gamble. And so more specifically, my strategy, I wasn't as buttoned up as other investors may be when it comes to real estate. But I took chances, honestly.
And did you work with a bank or a community development financial institution on the ribbon?
For the ribbon, yes. For the ribbon, more specifically, this is an $8.2 million property. And, the intriguing thing about the ribbon is you get what you negotiate. This was a property that, in general, as a developer, you need to bring anywhere from 10 to 20% equity to the table. In my scenario, I brought $30,000, which is unheard of. And so it was a time of COVID. There was a time where there were so many properties and redevelopments that were basically stalled because the cost of construction just went through the roof, right? The cost of materials just continuously rose, and there were so many projects that once again stalled that by the time I got my project to the closing table, the funding partners were looking for more equity from me, but at that point we were just in too deep, and I'm like, look, this is all I got. I ain't got the other, couple $100,000 you asking for. So can you in turn roll the development fee that I had in the proposal, or in the pro forma more specifically, and use that as equity along with the other grant dollars that I was able to bring to the table as well. And the funding partners didn't say no, they didn't say yes. They just, I just met them for the closing, a couple weeks later, and there you have it. So you get what you negotiate when it comes to real estate development. But the beauty about the city of Detroit is just there's so much opportunity here that the funding partners here, and there's so little, let's say, drive, or there's not a lot of developers. There's more now than there were 5-10 years ago, but there's not a lot of developers willing to develop the communities as or at least at that present moment. And so when you come with a solid concept, and if you have site control, if you have a good strategy in place, you'd be shocked at what you can accomplish without a lot of money. I just leave it at that.
You had other forms of capital. You had track record, right?
I didn't have a track record.
Well, you did the fifth. You had the single family. So
So going from $1,000 land bank house to an $8 million development. So it's a good point you brought up, because without the track record, I did have the community support, and that, luckily for the property that we're talking about, the community and the bank actually partnered to determine who was going to develop this site. And so luckily I was able to talk to block club captains and associations and things of that nature before the decision was made. I'd take people out, have a cup of coffee with folks, and I'd listen. I'd, say, hey, look, I want to develop this site. I'm new to this game when it comes to the larger properties like I'm proposing, but at the end of the day, I'm here to talk to you. I want to hear what you want to see on this corridor, and I just sit back and listen, right? And so luckily, those conversations led to me getting the community to support me, and the funding partners had no other option but to go with what the community wanted, which got me ultimately to the point where I was able to break ground. So
I guess for me, it's making sure that just keep the momentum going. Sometimes people have grand ideas and there's the inertia's not there,
right.
The momentum's not there. So whatever you can do, whether it's getting a cup of coffee or jumping into that first property, whatever it is you need to do just to get off the sideline, and get people like, okay, she's doing the thing, right? She's enrolling in this program. She did that program. She's applied for loans. She has saved up money in her account. When people have the momentum, it just adds to the case.
Absolutely.
So it's encouraging people, just don't, an idea is great. Then invest in that idea. It's worth it.
1,000%.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. Where do people follow you for more insights into what you do?
Shameless plug. I got a YouTube channel.
There you go.
It's Flux City, Detroit. Get a chance, check it out.
We'll drop it in the bio.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time. And
Thank you very much.
thanks for all you do for our community.